Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
The Word docs acknowledge that we are meeting today on the lands of the Kaurna people, and we recognise elders past and present. These lands have never been ceded.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome back to Word Docs. I'm Dr. Amy Matthews and I'm here today with Dr. Alex Vickery-Howe.
Yo, ma.
Dr. Sean Williams.
I have no idea how to follow that.
I don't know if anyone does. I don't think even Alex can follow that one.
But hello everybody. Hello Yo-Yo Ma, or whoever Alex
Yo-Yo
is
Ma.
channeling.
Welcome to Word
channeling.
Docs. Alex has been drinking sugar, so we don't know where this might go. I do want to start this episode by drawing our listeners' attention to something they can't see, which is the fact that we are recording this from inside Flinders' new ambisonic sound studio.
Yes, the temporary home for the most sophisticated sound system available on the planet right now.
And so what else would you do with this sophisticated sound system than record Word docs in it?
That's right.
It's all been worth it.
They've spent $500,000 just on a playground for us. Hooray.
I do believe we're the first thing to happen in here.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
So, we popped this cherry, people.
And for now, we're the best thing to happen.
We are.
Well, shout out to Scott. Scott, the amazing, hardworking person who's building this studio around us almost as we speak.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
We love you, Scott, but we'll see other people.
So anyway, it's apt that we are on campus all together within this ambisonic sound studio because we're going to talk academic stuff today. So everyone get your bonnets on.
Get your bonnets on.
Yeah, like do you have a bonnet? I have a bonnet from my PhD.
Yes, I do have a bonnet.
You have a bonnet?
Oh, that kind of bonnet. I thought
Yeah.
it was – I'm waking up now because when you said academic stuff, I kind of thought, oh, no, I much prefer talking about exciting things.
This is
But
going to be heaps exciting.
This is going to be super exciting
All right,
because you're
so-
leading the conversation.
So we wanted to talk about the exegesis, which is a part of writing that belongs within the academy, right? So if you're a creative writer at a university, you have to write an exegesis as well as your creative work.
That's true.
So anyone who is not in a university is thinking, what the hell is that thing? So I've got some definitions and some questions here, but I thought we could start by just throwing over to you guys. How would you describe an exegesis? Silence, that's a hard question.
The academic research framework / justification for your creative piece.
Yeah, exactly, sure.
And I would say it with that much energy.
Doing it with jazz hands helps.
Well, I love the origin of the term. So the Bible, which is sort of famously complicated and incomprehensible, really, used to require little sidebars in ancient manuscripts that explained what was going on or explained the religious meaning of what's inside the text. And they were called exegeses. So am I right? Is that
That's
right?
exactly
Amy? That's
right,
exactly.
yeah.
Oh, good, great.
Spot
Because
on.
my father was trained to be a priest when I was a teenager, so I picked up a lot of this kind of mad stuff, and I think that's really interesting. And that purpose for the exegesis remains. I think that it's a little sidebar in which a creator can explain what the hell they were doing, and it exists in the academy and exists outside the academy as well.
Yeah, so it's an explanation. And the idea is that when you do honours, masters, PhD, a kind of research degree, that you have to explicate or explain what you were doing, like how it's research and how it's different from being a writer in the wild where you just pop out the creative work.
And we make our students do it in the undergraduate years as well.
And they love it. They love it.
They do.
They see it coming and they're like, this is my favourite part of the course.
It's interesting because I think people sometimes dread it until they're doing it, and then they go, "Oh, this is actually a lot of fun."
Yeah. You learn a lot, I think, by explaining your own work. So I wanted to talk about the different models and about some of the research and the context for this, listeners, is that we're currently working on an article about it. So it's something that we're trying to think through, and we're also trying to think through what it would look like outside of a university or outside of the written word. So
that last one's really interesting.
it is. So I want to circle around to that. So I just want to start with thinking about the context of it. So there's been an awful lot written on it. And if anyone's interested, there is a journal called Text, T-E-X-T, which is the journal of the Australasian Association of Writing Programs. And there's a lot of articles in there about the exegesis. And some of the biggest scholars who've written on it would be Craig Batty, Jerry Kroll, Donnelly Breen and Jen Webb.
Is that Craig Batty from UniSA here in Adelaide? Wonderful.
Yep.
And Jerry Kroll, who
of course.
was at Flinders.
Yeah, she's an emerita professor here at Flinders. So Jen Webb talks about how there is a wicked problem of being an artist in an academy, and a wicked problem is a problem that defies neat solution, that any solution you find leads to more problems.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, it came originally from social planning in the 1970s. So the idea of how you de-ghettoise populations, that whatever choice you made led to more problems.
Right.
But Jen Webb's written about how putting artists in the context of a university creates wicked problems, because you need to kind of think through how creative work is researched, how then do you explain that to people outside of the creative arts. These are things we kind of struggle with on a daily basis. But so I thought we could start by thinking about how theorising our work is about that wicked problem, about how just the fact that you need an explanation is kind of loaded.
Yes, why do we have to explain our art at all?
Do you think you need to, like where do you stand on that argument of?
I'm probably, I was going to say, I'm probably the driest person here in the sense that I don't really have a problem asking people to do that or expecting that of myself, because partially because of who my PhD supervisors were. I was really taught to be quite academically meticulous, and I don't really have an issue with it. Whereas I know other people on campus and on various campuses, there's a kind of tension there. Whereas I'm quite willing to take a step back and go, I'm interested in the research problem before I'm interested in a creative solution, if that makes sense.
See, that's interesting. So because I think there are different models of exegesis, and I think at Flinders we have lent in that model you're talking about, the one that begins with a research question. And in fact, that's what we teach at honours level, is to come up with a research question and then explore it through the creative output and the exegesis. So there are the three different models would be the research question model, we can go into in a minute, the commentary model where you comment on your work, and then there's the context where you give context. So do you want to explain what you understand the research question model to be?
Me?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, my problem is that I find research fascinating as long as it's not related to the field I'm actually supposed to be an expert in. So, you identify a research question, you explore it through your creative work. But if you're someone like me, you identify a research question and you read history, politics, sociology, environmental science.
Yeah, so you're getting at something here about how creative artists are often very interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary.
Yeah, and I have very little interest. It's a problem. It's probably a flaw in lots of ways. I have very little interest in academia within my field. So I kind of see the creative work as a distillation of research in all these other areas.
I think you and I are very similar in that way, because I feel like I'm interested in the content rather than process.
I've got no interest in
and
process.
form.
I have no interest in that. And that's not necessarily a great thing as a teacher.
That's just you.
But that's just me, yeah.
What about you, Sean?
I'm still learning. Before I came to the university, of course, I wrote tons and tons and tons of books, some of which need explanation and some of which required explanation in terms of its promotion. So for me, my exegetical writing has usually been like the afterword to a novel or the introduction to short stories, and writing in blog posts and so on and so forth. So that issue of explaining how I underwent my research, explaining what I think the novel was about, and explaining how the reader should read it sometimes has always happened. But I am struggling at the moment to do exegetical writing within the academy, because I'm still learning how to do it. And it's interesting that you had three different methods there. What were the three again? The context was one.
Context model, commentary model, and the research question model. If anyone wants to read more about it, Gibson, Webb, West, and Breen have written about it. So Breen spelled Brien. So there's a lot of
really
writing on this
interesting.
stuff.
I mean, a lot of what you're describing, Sean, is that paratext? Like the text
It
around a
probably
text?
is paratext as
Writers
well.
have always
maybe.
done it. Like if you think about Dickens and Twain giving lecture tours about their book, or you think about festivals, or you think about interviews, watching the book show and seeing them interview someone, I think writers have always been contextualizing, commenting on, reflecting on. I think for my mind, exegetical thinking, speaking, writing has always happened. It's just not necessarily theorized to the point a university requires for a degree.
Take it to, yeah. Because I guess in drama terms, paratext would also apply to all the interviews you do before a production, all the interviews you do during the building, the festival context, the what's going on in the foyer, all of that would be paratext. So just a very, very quick example, and I won't mention the name of the show because this is a bit cruel, and I don't even remember, to be honest. Oh. But I once saw something in the context of an Asian festival that was not. It was sort of like a German cabaret show, and I remember thinking, part of my problem with this show is nothing to do with the show itself. It's just that I'm at this festival where I'm expecting it's like you go to a horror film and you get Sleepless in Seattle. Yeah. And you're there going, so like the paratextual relationship between me as an audience member and that thing was kind of off. And I think sometimes as a creator, all of that extra work you do helps people to frame what it is they're reading or what it is they're looking at.
About going to visual art, like you go to an art gallery, there's always a kind of, if you go to an exhibition, either a booklet or on the wall, the decals on the wall that kind of are an exegetical little statement about the art. So I think we're quite used to it. We're just not necessarily used to it in academic. So to go back to Sean's statement, you were asking about those three models. You think probably some of the other models are more likely suitable for you than the research question?
Maybe. I'm wondering about the commentary model. Can you tell us more about that? I'm guessing what it means just from the name of it, but I could be completely wrong.
So just to elaborate on this, Gibson and Webb also talk about going back to basics about the research, like what is the research? And they say there is research for art, right? So if you're writing a novel set in Antarctica, the research about Antarctica. If I'm writing a Western set in the 1880s, the research about the 1880s. So there's research for the art.
When Alex is writing about the end of the world.
Yeah, that's right.
First I must end it, then I will write about it.
Then there's research about art, right? So if I'm writing a romance, thinking and reading and writing about romance as a genre, for example, is about the art. And then there's research through art. So I think those help to so commentary would be commenting on how you did one of those, right? Commenting about the research you did for the art, for example.
Yes, yeah.
And it's funny doing this reading for this article that we're writing has got me thinking about maybe complicating how I teach the exegesis, maybe thinking about because some students don't work very well with the research question model, which has been a model that has been very strong at Flinders for a very long time. Maybe a couple of these other models would be more suitable for some of the students.
This is really interesting, Amy. This is quite fascinating.
I am a very interesting person.
That's true. And I feel bad now for going earlier because this is absolutely riveting.
I woke him up, Alex.
Yeah, you did.
You got him back. He's back in the game.
I'm alive. My heart is beating again. Because this is interesting both as a teacher and as an artist and as somebody who occasionally reads exegetical material as well, this is fascinating. Do continue.
Well, okay, so here's one of the other things I've been thinking about, which is Cowan and Webb and Breen also write about how the fact is we're used to knowledge production, which is what we do at university, right? We produce knowledge. Being that of scholars responding to art or contextualising or comment. So English literature or other literary studies are responding to existing works of art, right? And they're contextualising it or commenting on it. The bit we're doing differently is creating the actual art. So we are both author and subject.
Yes.
And so there's a tension there, I think. I know for me there's a irresolvable wicked problem there of I can never get comfortable being both the author and the subject.
In one article,
in one piece of work, like when you're and I don't know how much I want to. I mean, this is why I think I'm with Alex. I'm interested in the content, so I will write about genres, or I will write about texts, or I will write about other work.
Yeah.
And I have written an exegetical book, a monograph, and I have written exegetical articles, but there is an inherent discomfort for me because I don't particularly want to analyse my own work.
No, I have no interest in that. I mean, when I did my PhD, I remember my supervisor going, can we just talk more about the play you did? And I was like, just talking about all these other ideas and going, I've read about interculturalism and transnationalism and do you know about this? And he's like, yes, but you also wrote a creative work. I'm like, forget that. That's just me riffing on it. So yeah, I hate talking about.
So why? Why do you hate it?
I just don't think it's very interesting. I think the whole point of telling a story is to try and I see it as finding a exciting, palatable way to help an audience engage with a more complicated idea.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm like, no, look at the idea. Look at the cool idea. Look at this thing that's happening. I've just made it a rom-com or I've just made it a horror story. But actually the interesting part is over here. And so I see it as, I might read a whole bunch of books and articles that I know that a lot of or other people might find kind of dry, like I said at the beginning. So then I go, okay, how can I package that problem in a way that people will actually want to engage with? But then I don't want them to talk about the thing I did. I want them to talk about the problem.
Yeah. Isn't this interesting? Because I think one of the problems of creative practice and exegesis is there is a million ways to do it.
Yes.
There's no one way. And so it's really tricky to teach because it's like I don't want to limit you by giving you a cookie cutter approach because you might, you might explore a different area that will be brilliant and I can't picture it.
Yes.
But I have been on committees in the last couple of years sort of looking at non-traditional research outputs, which is creative outputs. And often people are only used to one way of doing it. So we have colleagues who are interested in process, who their entire exegetical practice is about process of creating art and can't really get their head around that content-driven way of doing it.
Yeah, I've dealt with journal editors who just go, why can't you talk about the thing? I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. No, that's not interesting. And they're like, oh, we think that would be interesting, and then you kind of go, well, I'll meet you halfway or, I'll do a section on that. But I think both ways you encounter differences and
they're quite radically different
they're
ways
radically different ways of looking at it. Yeah.
And they're both viable. So, Sean, I was thinking about you because Sean, some of you may not know, but did not come from the same kind of, Alex came from a drama background. I have like a history, English and film studies background and then moved into creative writing. But Sean actually did what degree, Sean?
I did a PhD in creative writing. Or do you mean my economics degree?
Yeah, your economics degree.
Well, I didn't finish my economics degree.
But you never started out in literary studies or one of these kind of arts where you learned those kinds of essay writing.
No, that's right. In fact, I dropped English from year 12 because it was possible and I just wasn't interested in that kind of thing. And
yet you went on to have a very long and successful career as a professional author, right? 40-something novels.
Yes, and when I think about the sort of paratextual or exegetical writing I've done in the past, it's all about my own work. So I think I'm actually really different to you two. The only kind of writing I feel qualified to write about is my own writing, and I haven't found a way to do that because I'm embarrassed by how solipsistic or egotistic that might look. And I feel that I possibly could do that now because I have such a body of work behind me. So I can talk about the creative decisions I made in this book as opposed to the in similar circumstances, the different decisions I made in previous books. And I think I would be very interested in writing about that, but I'm not sure that anybody ever would be interested in reading it. So I need to find a way to navigate.
We would.
Well, I think there's an interesting long arm of a creative body of work and, how you've changed and comparing something you wrote last year with something you wrote 20 years ago. Or
you go back and read your early books as a stranger.
Yeah, you're kind of treating your work the way a literary studies scholar would treat, Dickens' work or Stephen King's work or whoever's work.
That's right.
Where you look at patterns. But it's really interesting because you're the author. There's an academic named Bacon who publishes in text who wrote about how one form of the exegesis can be what they called a decisive memoir.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, I thought of you.
I'm writing this down in my remarkable.
Because I wrote a monograph that was an exegesis called Navigating the Kingdom of Night that is part memoir. Like it stitches together sort of literary studies, exegetical stuff with memoir. And it was a very uncomfortable thing to write because I have zero interest in writing memoir. But it was the way.
Yeah, me too.
It was the way to tie it together, right? Like it was, and I didn't enjoy it, and I have not gone back to that form. But there are a lot of people who do write exegetical work in that memoir style.
Yes, I mean many. Yeah, it's interesting because my background is in drama, but I don't think I took much drama from my drama degree. I know that sounds really weird. I think it was kind of quote. I think that my supervisors were really cultural theorists.
Yeah.
Internationalists. They were very heavily political. And I think I would have left drama school in the second year were that not the case. I had zero interest in the craft of acting or any of that stuff.
Maybe you were in the wrong degree.
I think I probably was in the wrong
degree. In creative writing.
I think I was probably in the wrong degree with a particularly good teacher and just kind of went, this teacher's really fascinating.
But as a result, you can project and you have a great voice.
Yeah, that's hey.
Hey.
It's never learnt to move properly. The movement teacher just despaired, just said, you're a head on a stick.
And you can't roll a cigarette
Can't roll a cigarette on stage. But I think it's interesting that even within, this is the great thing about an arts degree, is that you might have a specialisation, but you can kind of shift and move and weave and go, actually, what I'm really interested in is over here.
So what's interesting here is this sense of the me, like being the author. The exegesis is really, which I find so hilarious because obviously we had Roland Barthes in the 60s with the death of the author. And then the exegesis brings the author right back going, here's what I was doing.
Yeah, it's because my PhD, I was discouraged from doing that, but I had a large diary section.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, do we call this person the writer? In the first draft we did, then we went, that's ridiculous. It's me. So then you had to go, well, it was me then, and this is me now, and try and distance it that way.
Young Alex versus old
it was really
Alex.
about 2 years earlier or a year earlier, but kind of crazy Alex in the middle of it, and then more reflective, slightly saner. What'd you say? Slightly what?
Slightly crazier.
No, slightly. The later one was slightly sanier than the one that was slightly saner than the one that was in the middle of it. But yeah, how do you distance yourself? Should you distance yourself? Should you just own that? Can you own that, but also give yourself a wider context?
Yeah.
And all these choices are possible. They're all allowed, and I think when finding your own exegetical voice for this kind of writing is the challenge, just like it is with creative writing.
Yeah, I think voice is. That's one of my notes. For our article is the 3 things to think about: a voice, audience, and purpose. So what voice who is speaking, right? What voice are you choosing to speak in? And that's dictated by who you're speaking to.
Yes.
And then why you're speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I'm writing this down too, Amy. This is fantastic. I'm the market for the paper. I'll learn so much about it.
So there's another quote I'm going to use. There's not much left, and then I'm going to pose some questions. I think I'm taking up the whole podcast.
Yep, we've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm going to be quick.
Really?
I'm going to be quick. Barbara Bolt talks about the chaos of practice. That creative practice is a kind of, and I would say it's more like organic or there's a subconscious element that's very strong in creative practice. And she talks about the exegesis being tasked with the realizations that emerge out of the chaos of practice. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to think about. So this segue that I've got 3 minutes to wrap up is really that what we've been thinking about, the 3 of us, is the form of the exegesis, right? Yes. Is because a lot of what Word Docs has done is to be looking at that chaos of practice and trying to think through the logic and meaning and patterns in that chaos of practice.
And our definition of practice is quite broad isn't it? It's not just writing. It's saunas with Yakuza. It's
trains
train
and
trips.
Scientologists.
Yes. Alex's life is one creative practice.
It is. You are creative chaos in practice.
Creative chaos personified.
So then what we've been thinking through is what are the boundaries of the exegesis, right? Like, does it exist outside of a university context? I think we've kind of decided today it does. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I think
it does.
Should it exist outside of the university context as an explanation, and why? And then you've got the question of audience, right? So in a university context, in many ways, it's a hoop to jump through to prove that you have done this amount of work in order to qualify for some kind of degree.
Yeah, it's joining a club in a way.
Joining a club.
Yep.
I like that. You even get a special hat.
You get a hat at the end and you're in.
We're in the gang.
We're in the gang.
PhD gang.
So I think what's been driving us, just so everyone knows, because we're probably going to circle back to some of these topics.
Oh, yeah.
So what are the boundaries of the creative writing exegesis? What happens if we push those boundaries? And where are the limits? So what we're interested in, can a podcast be considered exegetical? What do you think?
Yes. Because I think
hope so.
Oh, yeah, I hope so too. I think there's an onus on the creative exegesis to be creative, which means kind of pushing boundaries and experimenting and trying new forms. I mean, of course, you don't have to do that to still be an exegesis, but I think
it's so interesting.
it's very desirable.
What's really interesting about this for me is I don't know what year we all did our PhDs, but
I graduated 2007.
right. So you were first.
2013.
I was around about that time, I think, maybe 14. But when I first started, and mine was a long period, and I intermitted and wrote other things.
Got kidnapped here
Got
and
kidnapped here by pirates.
And-
You know. But when I first started, justifying creative practice as an exegesis was something I had to spend a lot of time doing in my introduction. Like I had to really justify that with examples and notes from my mother and all the rest of it. But now I would think that is really expected, like creative practice as valid research is
Absolutely,
more
and
expected.
in fact, it's beyond the creative arts now. You can do an artifact in other degrees. So you can do a PhD in health sciences with a creative artifact
Right.
as an output.
So I suppose in probably I suppose with 10, 15 years, no, not quite, almost.
Alex says you should see him right now, people, because he's looking at this guy. He's trying to think.
This
He's
is-
trying to do maths.
I'm
the
gonna take a
boy
photo of him.
who failed business maths. 2014, we're nearly 10. So,
8 years.
yeah,
Alex.
I,
It's 8
we're close.
years.
I'm just trying to round it up. But that's quite a dramatic shift.
Yep.
I mean, that's quite a kind of, to the point now where I feel quite odd because the thing I advocated for in my work is now the normal thing that I kind of sometimes push back against. So I'm in this kind of
You
weird,
always have to be pushing against something.
whatever's happening, I
Yeah.
have to be contrary.
You have to be.
That's your middle name.
Yeah.
Alex Contrary.
I don't have a middle name. It can be my middle
There you
name.
go. We're going to fill out the forms.
So anyway, this is just throwing down some ideas about the exegesis, and I'd quite like to circle back as we work on our article because there's some other things.
Yes.
I've got some points I'd love to come back to about digital media and moving beyond the written word, which is interesting as writers. But books are moving into audiobooks. Like a lot of people are reading audiobooks.
Yes.
So moving beyond reading on the page to listening, and then thinking about voice, about how informal can you get theorizing something before, like if you drop all the jargon, which we tend to do on this show.
We do.
If you drop all the jargon, at what point have you broken the genre of the exegesis?
Well, I think as soon as you break the definition of what an exegesis is, if you're no longer explaining the art, if you're no longer explaining the processes behind the art or the context of the art, if you're doing none of that, it's not an exegesis.
But I think universities are much more rigorous than
Yeah.
us. Like I think
Oh,
if
yeah.
you
That's
had
true.
some deans
Yeah.
of research listen, they would say, no, you're not.
Hello, Deans of Research.
Hi, Deans
You're
of
wrong.
Research.
Please listen. But I think, last point on that is one of the things I tell students a lot of the time when they, especially undergrads who are just like, what's the hell, what the
What's the hell?
What's the hell? What the hell's going on with academic writing? And I go, well, I was taught that part of the reason this jargon exists is the quest for specificity.
Yes.
And so often the jargon, the difference between interculturalism, transnationalism, transculturalism, cosmopolitanism, those things
Matter.
they matter when you're trying to be specific. But in the process of hitting that specificity, you can alienate so many people. So what's the sweet spot between having that sense of academic rigor and specificity, but communicating in a way that the people around you can connect with
Yeah.
and are not put off by?
The other thing I want to float too is that possibly what we do in this podcast is put out there the process of exegetical thinking, that it's not a final, even though we're publishing it in the form of a podcast, it's not a final piece so much as making visible process of thinking through
Yes.
or the beginning of thinking through sometimes.
Absolutely. I think that's very wise. Amy.
I'm very wise and interesting today.
You are. You totally are.
I have notes though today. And on that note, I think we better wrap up because otherwise we might put Sean back to sleep.
As
No,
our brains
impossible.
turn to spaghetti, I can't say spaghetti.
Biscotti?
As our brains
What's the
turn
hell?
to spaghetti.
I want to get a T-shirt now that says "What's the hell?" I reckon every episode we get a T-shirt with something that Alex has said.
What's the hell?
What's the hell, Biscotti?
And that's about the limit of our show today.
Limit of our brains.
So thanks for joining us once again. We're glad to be back and especially here from the Ambisonic Sound Studio.
That's right. Thank you, Amy, for such an interesting conversation.
For that wisdom.
I didn't have much to contribute because I was learning every second of it, and my brain is fizzing with new information and excitement, and I hope our listeners' brains are too. I'm sure they are.
While you fizz away, listeners,
Happy writing.
happy writing.
Oh, happy writing from Alex. He got in there first. That never happens. This is a special day, listeners.
See you next time.
Fare you well.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them starts with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Okay, because that stuff was obviously going to be no good for an
No, because
ending.
we're violating people's medical privacy.
Histories. Yes.
Here we are with Word Docs violating people's medical privacy.
Including such characters as Nine-Fingered Johnny and Nine-Fingered Lisa.
Glasshead Guja.
Alrighty-o. Come on, host.
Okay.
Bring us home,
All right. Okay.
Dr. Vickery Howe.
Fucking A, Alex.
Fucking A.
Fucking A.
All right.
What's the?
What the hell?
And today's segment is What's the?
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.